Good morning, everybody. It's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question, which I will flip in here for you guys. And basically, he wants to know that given that we have diminished returns on muscle gains no matter what we do anyways, and that eventually, given enough time, that most muscles will probably reach their potential with sufficient stimulation over the years under the iron, years under the bar, will weak points eventually catch up? So yeah, good question. Let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. Do a little bit of crafting. Actually, this morning is just going to be some busy work. Not so much crafting, but busy work that needs to be done nonetheless. All right. So yeah, I mean, weak point training. This is something we talk a lot about, and not just powerlifting or bodybuilding, but any sport, any endeavor that you're trying to achieve. But for this purpose, though, this is really just about weightlifting. So we're not going to talk about sport-specific weak points because that's its own separate topic. Obviously, if you have a weak point in a sport, it's not going to eventually catch up, and you don't have unlimited time to get it caught up. So we're talking about just weightlifting, and by weak point, we mean, if your triceps are a weak link, meaning your triceps are out of balance with other muscles in the same exercises, or their size is lagging compared to something like your chest and shoulders. Or biceps, or whatever these smaller muscles are, will they eventually catch up? Great question. It is a good question because we do spend so much time talking about this. Look how much focus there is in the physique world on isolation movements. I mean, look how many powerlifters spend tons of extra time isolating either their hamstrings or triceps. So, will they eventually catch up? Yeah, they probably will, given sufficient stimulation, and particularly again for drug-free lifters, because as you're training as a drug-free lifter, you are eventually going to cap out, meaning you're going to reach a point, if you've been training really effectively, probably by the 3-year mark as a completely drug-free lifter, you're going to have gained 95% of the size that you were going to gain ever from lifting weights your entire life, meaning you're going to cut back to a point to where gaining a pound of muscle per year is going to be considered quite an achievement at a certain threshold. And that's usually by the 3-year mark if you have trained properly. So let's look at this. And we can look at it from the perspective of something like chest and triceps. Show muscles that everyone cares about. I don't care if you're a power lifter or a bodybuilder or a recreational lifter just trying to be healthier. Everyone cares about chest and triceps. Chest and triceps are, however, not always in balance for people. Obviously, if you want to quickly bring up a weak point because you feel it's out of balance, the best way to do so is to train it directly. Arguably, because we can also pick very effective compounds to do the same thing, meaning if either one of those muscles is lagging and you just do more dips, add more workload to your dips, train harder on your dips, try to improve on dips, either through weight, extra reps, or just doing more total sets of them, both of those muscles are going to grow faster, most likely. How much faster? Well, that's going to be arguable because every muscle is going to have a limited amount of growth it can make. And that's usually what causes weak points. Weak points either exist because we are performing exercises incorrectly, or because we have a disproportionate bone structure or disproportionate genetics from one muscle to another. What do I mean by bad technique? Well, think about bench press, for example. Look how many guys out there can't build a big chest bench pressing, no matter how much they seem to train the exercise, right? Their chest seems to lag. Yet many champions over the years have used the bench press as a primary chest builder. It's arguably, I've even seen some experts, again, I've seen Dr. Mike Israetel, who is a competitive bodybuilder, who does have a PhD in exercise science. In his opinion, the bench press is the best, or at least one of the top 3 chest builders of all time. Yet a lot of people can't seem to get it to work for their chest. Why? They perform it incorrectly. Their technique is loose. They don't pull their scapula back, and they don't come all the way down and touch their chest properly. Or if they do touch their chest, they bounce off the chest. Doing those things, letting your scapula stay way apart, bouncing off your chest, instead of touching it correctly, or doing partials, yeah, that does take some of the stress off the pecs. Your pecs are still going to grow if you do those things. I mean, how can you take an exercise if the chest is the primary mover and most important muscle and have it not grow. It's going to grow, it's just going to be disproportionate unless you're genetically gifted there, because you are taking stress off of the chest doing the exercise. However, given enough time, because you are getting some stimulation of the chest no matter what you do there, it's impossible to completely remove it. Your chest is eventually going to grow from that workload over the months and years. It's just not going to grow as fast as you'd like. So that's going to be one of the issues, and those people oftentimes need to pick a different exercise, or they need to isolate the chest, it seems like, to get there. But their problem is that they're not using the chest correctly on the exercise, and then when they suddenly add another exercise in that it's harder to take the chest out of, like the dip, it's very, very hard to perform a dip if you're using any range of motion on it, other than just doing the top few inches. It's impossible to de-emphasize the chest in a dip. It just is. I mean, it's one of those exercises, even if you try to, as long as you're going somewhat deep, you're going to get that deep pump in your chest. You're going to feel it there no matter what. So, oftentimes, the way that we perform exercises, because we pick exercises that we could technically de-emphasize a muscle in if we perform them incorrectly or lift for ego, certain muscles lag. Other people, it just has to do with structure. Someone like me, I have an enormous rib cage. My chest tends to grow very easy and look big no matter what I do. Arms take a lot more work. It's not that a person like me that their triceps don't grow, they just take more work. Because I started with a bigger chest and triceps. But the point is, if someone like me continues to just do those heavy compounds that work the triceps very effectively, they do grow. For example, people have asked me lately, what are you doing for triceps? I'm not. I do tons and tons of dips, and I do overhead pressing every time I train. Between those two compound movements, my triceps have come up, even though I've completely quit isolating them, because big heavy compounds get that done. And that's the interesting point. Given enough time, if you are doing well-balanced compound movements through your body, as you start to get diminished returns and certain muscles grow faster than others, that will force the muscles that are lagging in that kinetic chain to have to take more and more of the load. Meaning people have this idea, and it's hilarious, they're like, oh, the stronger muscle just takes over automatically. You sure about that? Because the kinetic chain stays the same. What eventually happens is that, given enough time, if one muscle becomes really disproportionate for your frame, and that's what people need to keep in mind. They're mixing this up because they're comparing people with different frames. But for your frame, if you have a muscle that outpaces others, or you're using an exercise that, or particularly when you have two exercises that work those, such as, again, we'll use the dip and the overhead press, what I do. They work the same muscles, just in slightly different ratios and maybe different support muscles. They work chest, delts, and triceps. You start doing a couple different exercises that work those things. And again, most people do at least two compounds that work any given body part on a well-balanced program. What eventually happens? Well, yeah, you'll have a muscle that gets stronger and outpaces the other one, but what ends up happening, it gets to a point to where it actually, if it has a limiting muscle, let's say on your dips or your bench press, that your triceps become your weak link. Your chest just doesn't take over. Your chest doesn't take over on an exercise that uses the tricep as a primary mover. What eventually happens is the chest starts getting less stimulation because it is so powerful, but you can't remove that weak link from the chain. Now, the fastest way to catch that up would be to do more tricep work, and no one's arguing against that. But what will eventually happen is the weak link will end up getting more stimulation, because the weak link is what's holding you back from progressing. That weak link will get to a point to where it is getting more and more fatigue from that exercise. Well, eventually it will reach a point to where the weak link has to grow faster if you want to progress at all anymore. And that's a good way to look at it. In the long term, as long as your routine and the exercise selection that you have is balanced, eventually the weak links will catch themselves up because they're forced to. Same thing on a chin-up. or even a barbell row. If your biceps end up being so weak and underdeveloped that they start to become the weak link in any of those big pulling back exercises, they will start to grow faster than your back, because they have to, because eventually the back is going to reach diminished returns, just like the chest will reach diminished returns on the bench press. We always see diminished returns. Every time we gain a given amount of muscle, it will take twice as long to gain that same amount of muscle again. That's pretty well understood. There is a diminished return formula almost for muscle growth. So what will happen, those lagging muscles will start to get not only more stimulation, but the faster growing muscle will slow down anyways because it's grown bigger. The reason this doesn't appear to be that way for many people, and in the long term who are on a balanced program, if they still have lagging muscles after a couple years, it's because of their individual bone structure. Meaning there's a certain proportion that people look for based upon bodybuilders or classic aesthetics. But you need to remember the people who have the classic aesthetics and what many people would consider to be a perfect physique are very genetically gifted with very balanced bone structures, very balanced muscle bodies and insertions through their body. All right, that's genetic traits. And because, well over half of people, the majority of people do not have those perfect proportions, right? I think we all understand that. Therefore, their maximum growth and maximum size, particularly when they start hitting those hard diminished returns, might leave them looking slightly disproportionate compared to those genetically gifted individuals. And I think that's what creates a lot of the confusion there. That's what creates a lot of the confusion. And what ultimately happens for those people, if their goals are to be truly balanced aesthetically, if that's what they're looking for, sometimes they have to back off on the dominant muscles due to their structure and let them shrink. So that's kind of the problem people run into. You can't, if you're not genetically gifted towards perfect proportions, your lagging body parts ultimately, when they reach near their maximum size, are going to be out of proportion to your dominant body parts. If your goal is that perfect classic look, you can't train for maximum size in the long term because you're going to have your muscles that are your genetic strong points, again, due to frame and structure, that are going to overshadow the others when you start reaching your maximum size. So you actually have to let some of the muscles be smaller. Unfortunately, if that's your goal, some of the muscles are going to have to be smaller than their potential for you to stay in proportion. While the others that are out of proportion with them, you're going to have to focus on those being in maximum proportion. So the question is really tricky when you look at it in that context because it comes down to genetics. Are you going to eventually reach a point to where you're at your maximum proportion, your maximum size, and everything's balanced in terms of what your frame will hold? Yeah, everything is going to get eventually balanced due to the diminished returns and the fact that the weaklings will be forced to catch up. But are you still going to look balanced from a classic Greek statue aesthetic perspective? Maybe not. It all depends on your individual bone structure. All right, guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.